high quality as well.
Right.
So, should we start?
Have you pressed record?
Yeah, I've pressed record.
Yep.
Ding.
Right, let's start.
Do you know how they like do that thing? I never knew why they do it, but it's like the clapperboard where they try and get the audio. I mean, we're not recording in
Oh,
high quality, are we, Tim?
no. Maybe in a few episodes' time we can get
Yeah,
ourselves
when
a
we
clapperboard.
upgrade.
Nice.
Where's your microphone? I thought you were going to get a microphone. You need to get a microphone.
The thing is, I'm like looking after someone's dog in the Peak District.
Oh, fancy.
So my microphone has been delivered to my flat.
There we go.
So
Have you got one of
maybe
these?
I bought the one that you sent me a link to. I think you sent me two.
Oh my
I
god,
picked one.
we're gonna be microphone twinsies. Right, let's begin. Nothing like a very casual start, like we're so
Yeah,
nonchalant about this, aren't we?
yeah. We do this all day, every day.
I know, right? So, welcome to Untitled. This is a concept where we basically got jealous of all our friends who are doing these insanely good podcasts and they're recording themselves chatting about interesting things. And that's a really good motivator, really. We want to put some of our interesting sort of experiences to the forefront and sort of tell people what we think. I think in conversation with our clients, with our friends, we always have lots of interesting chats. We've had lots of cool conversations over the past few years. Massive respect for each other, I suppose. But I think some of that is just professional. Some of it is just curiosity. Some of it is just we're interested in similar things. You've got your sort of history of collecting things, and in automotive especially. I have to mention this because it's when this was my lockdown treat, right? You can't not mention this. So
That's very kind of you.
Tim wrote Micro But Many, which is just this very beautiful book that I bought from Bitmap Books. Is that where you can get it now?
Yeah, you can get it from Bitmap Box or you can get it from Amazon. Maybe we'll leave a link in the comments below.
Oh, we're shilling already. We
Haven't
both
even
got.
started.
Who knows? Started. Everyone's tuning out now at this stage. Look, this book is so beautiful, and it's got this amazing lenticular on it as well. Yeah, tell us a little bit about your micro machine collection, because I know there's videos
Oh,
on it and stuff, but I think it's
yeah.
worth mentioning because I've only got one micro machine here. You have something like
Mm.
how many?
I've got over 10,000 now, but I haven't counted in a while.
Oh my goodness.
Counting 10,000 gets a bit boring after a while, so I really need to come up with some kind of system. But yeah, I've got 10,000 micro machines. I started collecting when I was 6 or 7, when they were like actually meant for people of my
For
age.
kids, yeah.
And then it just kind of course, you get older and you get into music and CDs and girlfriends and then college but I always had like a shoebox worth tucked away. And then I think about maybe 10 years ago, maybe a bit longer, I just had this sort of urge to like, oh, I want all of them. I want every single one that's ever been made. And then that grew into a hobby or obsession. I'd love to understand the psychology of collecting. What's it for? Because I struggle to understand the point other than sort of my momentary enjoyment of sort of the hunt.
I think there's
But yeah,
partly the hunt, I guess. That's an interesting topic in itself. It's partly the hunt. It's partly
yeah,
the fact that we like seeking novelty, and in every single one there's some novel aspect, whether it's kind of imagining the world that they inhabit, or how close is this to the actual sort of original car that was based on, or the vehicle that was based on, all of those things.
yeah. I was never. I'm not really much of a like playing with them sort of guy. Even when I was a kid, I wouldn't sort of drive them around roads. For me, it was like the colors and the designs and the patterns on them, and collecting more and more and more and more. I see them. It's quite cheesy, but I see them each as individual works of art, because what normally happens is, you're right, the blank canvas or the body of the vehicle is based on real vehicles, from like Corvette to Aston Martin to Vector to anything in between. But because it was the 90s and the 80s, the paint jobs on them are just mad. Like they're almost like, what was it? Maybe 10 or 20 years ago, there was this big vinyl toy explosion where you would
Yes.
buy blank vinyl toys and you'd have famous
Yeah,
artists paint.
absolutely.
They're just like that.
And that's
So
continues. The super plastics of the world are still making
right,
those, and they're
yeah,
getting even more. I mean, in terms of creative forms, you're absolutely right. They were very vibrant. That's something that both kids and adults sort of appreciate. But I suppose it's got a retro and nostalgia feel to it now, and I think we kind of
yeah.
tend to kind of overlook how powerful that actually is in many sort of different sort of facets and settings. But on the collection side, several years ago, I was interested, like many others, in sort of the world of gamification, and
Yeah.
I kind of saw firsthand what it's like when we created a system called Library Game in my sort of agency, and it was a game that you played in libraries, and I saw firsthand how
Huh.
obsessive people would get about collecting achievements, and the whole sort of BLAP, badges, levels, achievements, and points, is a real urge. It's like some kind of human seeking sort of behavior.
I wonder if it's sort of the hunter-gatherer hoarding things is like
Probably is. Yeah,
resource for
how
times
can
of
you
hard.
how can you sort of kind of really drive against that kind of urge that's very sort of primal about us? So let's get to the concept of the show. So the show is called Untitled because we don't really have necessarily a theme for it. We talked about whether we could talk about sort of automotive and experiential factors and user experience. And the reason for that really is that, a big part of my work for the past few years has been working in automotive at Vital Auto. And Vital basically make, some of the most realistic, some of the most kind of content heavy demonstrators and show vehicles, that are completely indistinguishable from the real thing, because they're intended to showcase the design intent. I don't know why my internet is loading so slowly, but that's quite poetic, just loading bit by bit. Like these works took
I thought it was
ages.
intentional.
I'm going to tease it in. So this is Vital, and this has been my work for the past few years. And as someone who is a relative sort of outsider but a huge fan of cars, I kind of came across your work when you were at us2, and it's
Mm.
maybe important to say what you do now, I suppose. Do you want to kind of give a little intro to yourself?
Well, yeah, thank you, Shay, and thank you for the kind words. I feel like I have to reciprocate now, even though it's against my normal levels of comfort. But yeah, no, like I discovered Shay. I don't actually. I would love to remember the day we met, but I can't because I think there's a few times we just sort of crossed paths. But
We have a lot of
the
mutual
work that,
friends. Let's put it that way. We had
yeah,
more friends in common than many other sort of people that we probably know.
I would, yeah, that's a good point. And I always, I definitely came across you in the automotive space, and the very very short, crude way of me telling the difference between you and I is, you say you tend to be in the sort of physicality of tech innovation in automotive, and I'm more on the digital side of innovation in automotive with technology. So I actually feel like it's a bit of a yin yang situation where we can complete each other and we can actually come up with concepts that spread across physical, digital, or phygital, as I like to call it.
Absolutely.
So, and that's where I'm at the moment. I have my own design business called UXIXD, which is a tough name to remember, but it stands for User Experience Interaction Design. So it does exactly what it says on the tin. And that's, I've got a lot of automotive clients. I've worked with Audi and Ford and a few others from Saudi Arabia, but also anywhere where there's emerging technologies where perhaps user experience isn't as well defined as it is perhaps with apps or even HMI. So working with the future of the home with Samsung, working with the Natural History Museum at the moment on a really interesting
That's cool.
installation. Yeah, I'm just fascinated with how humans interact with things. So HMI is human machine interface, or how humans interact with the machine. I'm more into the human to whatever interaction. So how do they
That's
interact with cars and houses and apps and all sorts?
that's quite interesting because, as you say, the sort of HMI side is definitely something that, you know, because I used to work in sort of digital product development as well. I think one of the first and sort of foremost things that I saw as an opportunity is to sort of improve the user experience of vehicles at that sort of prototype level, to try and sort
Yeah.
of showcase and give a glimpse of what would be possible if you were to kind of add that level of depth and realism to the
Right.
actual sort of to the prototypes as well. So a big part of, I guess, what I've been sort of doing as well, and the huge overlap between our work is indeed, how do you make those
Yeah.
sort of digital interfaces physical, and how do you sort of give the most tangible version of the experience? So to kind of draw that sort of those two sort of areas together, I feel like no matter what we do in our sort of work, we are always sort of trying to kind of explore the interface of different things. Ways of digitally duct taping these things together as well is certainly of interest to us. So
Yeah.
the concept that we wanted to explore within the show is what would happen if you get two people, not necessarily us. So if anybody wants to take this concept, I'm happy to share some assets and ideas and thinking behind it.
Mm.
But what would happen if you were to get two people in a room and get a large language model to sort of give them some ideas and prompts? And the idea of sort of Exquisite Corpse, this game that kids would play, sort of came to mind. The idea that you can start to kind of juxtapose very different looking things, and usually with humorous results. So somebody would draw the head, somebody would draw the torso, and somebody would draw the legs. But if we took that one step further and just sort of mashed concepts together, what would happen? So, with that said, um, I kind of came up with this little Claude artifact, which is basically just prompting it. So I said, I want to create an Exquisite Corp style where we mash loads of different topics around automotive and UX. I mean, this is the laziest kind of prompting I've ever done. So I've resisted the temptation to make it any different, but this is what we ended up with. And basically, it gives you a little artifact that you can play. And if you click generate new juxtapositions, it'll give you some ideas that have mashed up these different themes together. So, should we press it a few times and then just see what catches our eye? Should we do that?
Yeah.
Oh, actually, just hang on. It's landed on a really good one. I don't want to miss this one. Haptic feedback meets micro sleep detection. That actually does
You know,
sound useful.
have you heard of what Nintendo just announced? The Alarmo.
The Alarmo with the oh yes, I have.
But Nintendo, this is so weird. It's like Nintendo have just launched an alarm clock that does detect micro movements in the sleep. I think it's through infrared, or even like range detection. But that's quite timely that comes up. Yeah.
Okay, I have to
Sounds
dig
like
deep into this.
it basically it's quite clever, and I'm not sure if it's like nightmare fuel or actually a good thing, where as you start tossing and turning in the morning,
Right.
it'll give you coins like in Mario, and it go ping. And the idea is that the more you sort of get up and out of bed, the more points or coins you earn. So it's encouraging you to get out of bed, which I could certainly do with, because I find it tough to get out of bed at the best of times.
Okay, that's quite
So I don't
interesting
know
and
if I
fun as
want
well.
Mario. Yeah. And then active noise enhancement meets personalized soundscapes. So what? Just explain for me and the audience what the different post-its mean.
So
The blue, green, yellow. Is it
oh no,
just
no,
three different?
there's no significance. It's just
Oh,
mashing these, and I just thought we'd keep pressing it until we get the right ideas. But just surface glancing at those, they're quite interesting, aren't they? Anyway, let's try it again. Let's try. Should we just keep hitting that and seeing what happens? Right, here we go. Okay, let's have a read. Blind spot detection means cloud references. Some of these are like really weird. Vulnerable road user protection meets predictive UI. That's
see, yeah. Are
yeah.
we supposed to make these three work together into a conversation?
I'd say we just pick one, and
Okay.
that becomes the topic of conversation. So,
So yeah.
yeah, post collision braking meets predictive gear shifting. Post collision braking. I don't know if we need post collision braking. Thank you.
Oh, remember last time I got the word breaking mixed up with breaking versus breaking.
All right, this is some of the concepts that are emerging are actually quite interesting, like 3D instrument cluster meets
Mm,
5G connectivity. I suppose we
mm.
could say a lot about just three-dimensional sort of interfaces and how. I mean, I say that, and I've literally got a Looking Glass display right next to me here. I've got the other
Cool.
one as well.
Uh-huh.
So this is basically a holographic device which sort of shows you a visual sort of that is holographic in without the need for glasses. Um,
Yeah.
so there's display technologies that enable stuff. There's HUDs. There's active eye tracking. I mean, the question I ask with technology is always why. Why would you?
Yeah.
This is a good
I've
jump
seen
off
I've
point.
seen one good example of this already in the automotive space. But to start with, I'll go back to Nintendo just to explain the technology. Nintendo came up with this Nintendo 3DS. So it's like a handheld gaming device, like a Game Boy, and it had what they call a stereoscopic screen, which, if I understand it correctly, it's effectively a lenticular screen where it gives the left eye and the right eye two slightly different perspectives on the same image. And what that does is it creates a very compelling 3D image. It looks like it's almost like coming out of the screen and you're manipulating a
That's
real
right.
object. And I saw almost something exactly the same technology, but used differently it was either a Land Rover or Range Rover, in
Right.
the sense that you had a screen, and on the driver and the passenger could see two different things, and they couldn't see each other's view
I see.
because of
Yeah.
the
Of
position in
course.
relation to the screen. So what I thought was really interesting about that concept was that this screen can serve two people at once, and the passenger and the driver have two very different needs for it. So on the passenger side, sorry, on the driver's side, it was still 2D,
Hmm.
but they could see just entire like Google Maps or some sort of navigational information. Whereas on the same screen in the passenger side, they were watching like BBC News. So it's not 3D in application, but it's uses the same technology
That's quite
for
cool.
is an interesting application.
Yeah. That's interesting. In terms of like distractedness, sort
Yeah.
of distraction reduction. Sorry, that would be quite cool because somebody could actually be watching something, a
Mm.
video, piped in to their ears directly, the audio, and the driver wouldn't be able to see that, and you'd still have the screen quite centrally and prominently. Um,
Yeah.
I feel like some of these applications are driven by the capabilities of the technology, and in some ways that's a good thing, but it also represents this incremental shift towards adding more and more content into
Mm.
the experience. Now, sometimes that's a great thing. Sometimes it's actually detracting from the overall sort of experience that some people seek, and some people just don't want all of that. The frills while they're driving, and
I agree, and I think that goes to your point about it can be done, but why? And for me, the interesting two technologies here is the 3D display, say, and the 5G connectivity. So the 5G connectivity implies that we could be streaming live high visual 3D renders into the display that are dynamic rather than like pre-rendered or necessarily preloaded. So you might have like
oh, I see.
Unity, Unreal Engine behind it.
Right, right.
So I
As opposed
guess
to lugging
so,
around like a beefy gaming
yeah,
setup and something that is very power hungry, like because the 5G
yeah,
reception shouldn't effectively. I suppose it's really hard for us to imagine that in the UK because of
mm,
how shocking our mobile networks are in certain places, and so
yeah.
I live sort of quite rurally, and my internet connection is so bad that we're going to move. So I think there's a
It,
definite, and that counts for both the sort of mobile connection and the hardwired connection. So
but
I think yeah.
I do have an idea for a novel application for these two technologies. So one thing I'm always struck by is how inaccurate wing mirrors are when they're just a piece of mirror, and you quite often see a sticker on the wing mirror that says
Objects are
objects in the mirror may seem closer than they actually are. So, what if we were to eradicate those wing mirrors and replicate it with a three-dimensional feed so that things in the mirror seem accurately distanced because of the 3D perspective. You see,
Correct. Yes,
so it's like
absolutely.
now these obstacles or other drivers are a bit more sort of naturally and intuitively displayed. And then we can, I don't know about the reduction in cost per se. I don't know if this technology would be cheaper than the cost of the wing mirrors, but at least it'll stop them getting knocked off or stolen.
It perfectly ties into the sort of trend of, I suppose, replacing analog with some kind of digital equivalent. And I think
Right.
there's something really interesting about replicating familiar. I mean, this is a completely separate, divergent sort of part of that conversation, but I do find when we had skeuomorphism, when in apps we were trying to replicate the qualities of things that people were familiar with, because
Yeah.
let's face it, we didn't have retina displays back then, so, and by back then I just mean 15 years ago, so instead what we had were low resolution displays on mobile devices, which still needed that kind of beauty and some kind of early adoption, so they didn't look as cold. I mean, if you think about what Nokia's were like and how hard edged the pixels were, you could see the
Yeah.
pixels, but as soon as pixel density increased, you couldn't really get away with having hard edges anymore, because one, you'd lose the line, and two, you could do so much more. It's still not retina resolution, but it enabled this sort of almost faking it with textures that I really loved. The whole sort of stitching, for example.
Yeah. Well, I wrote an article in one of my first books, Us Two. One of them, it would say, I think the title was skeuomorphism. It's not all bad, because there was a reaction, a negative reaction to skeuomorphism. Everyone was like, "Oh, this is anti-Dieter Rams and
I vaguely
anti-minimalism.
remember
It's
this.
not how UI should be going." But I've always thought UX and UI, if you were just to follow the textbooks, say, almost in a way that AI could now, what you would get would be a very boring landscape of very similar looking UI, which you
Correct.
could argue is already happening. But the one thing that we shouldn't forget is the brand and the consumer, and like we have to make sure that this thing looks on brand. So one of the things I wrote about was the Ferrari California from 2015, I think, had the same HMI as a Chrysler minivan. It's just very blue and LCD. And you think of Ferrari, you think of red and Italian craftsmanship, and you don't think of this awful, awful stock blue LCD screen.
Yeah.
So that's why I would say, use good UX UI principles, but
Right.
of course, if the HMI, if the screen is embedded in a wonderful, I know that Bentley have their own ranch to be able to farm their own specific leathers for their cars. Let's maybe have, if we want it to seem a bit more integrated, we could have like leather texture in the background to make it sort of match the interior of the car. And we could have stitching,
I think
because I think that's a bit more on brand, but of course still follow those UX UI principles.
absolutely. There's adhering to the principles, and then there's all of the things that sort of make the experience more unique
Mm.
to that vehicle, and to your particular context as well. I think we all have different sort of needs from mobility, and you may want that level of detail, or you might sort of completely see that as a distraction, as a kind of a way of replicating something that isn't actually there. And I think there's detractors and there's supporters on both sides. What really is a key thing is this notion of sort of digital craftsmanship, regardless of the sort of textural quality and the visual style and whatnot. You still need to give it some thought, and I think a lot of the time technology hasn't been sort of considered as carefully, and I think this is
Yeah.
because one, it's being developed really really quickly. Physical things take a lot of time, so you've got plenty of time to refine them, and there's a great lineage of kind of physical sort of form language. Whereas with digital, we're still, although for us, it's old hat, and we've been developing digital things for quite some time. I would say that it still feels like it's in its infancy. The moment you see something and it looks like fiction, you're just like, well, could you not have
Mm.
considered the user? Is who did you ask? And one of the things I feel is kind of lacking is, well, it's twofold. One is the fact that the technologists tend to work in isolation sometimes, and
Yeah.
the companies developing the technologies develop the most generic version that could be easily adopted and adapted
Yeah.
without sort of much disruption, and without much development cost. And the other one is that really the kind of the appetite and demand sort of comes from marketing sometimes, and that it doesn't sort of start off with the inception of the product. And I find that
Mm.
really, really problematic on many levels, because it isn't the best way to develop a product, is it? You're
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think there's so I come from a design agency background. I've never worked within an automotive company, but I've worked for almost all of them from a design agency perspective. And it's quite easy for someone in my position to say that they should be adopting more kind of design agency processes. Things like the one team approach, where you have the coders and the developers and the designers and the clay modelers, all working on things together, so that
sure.
the experience works holistically. But as you said, there's so many real world restrictions, like you said, like the working on the physical components of the car have year long lead times, and then the software unfortunately is considered right at the end, and you might be given 6 months if you're lucky. And then
Last
that's why I
Yeah.
think that the communication breaks down, and I think opening up those processes will help.
Last time when we spoke, I think I mentioned this example of I was in a really high end car. I won't mention the make of it, partly because I don't actually remember the make of it, which is terrible. But no, well, I'll say it. It was the M Box on the Mercedes. So
Okay,
it
yeah,
was incredible, like this vast panoramic sort of
mm,
screen. But the map on it was chugging. It was chugging like hell, and
yeah,
for someone who uh, is used to anyone who's used to a premium experience on their phone where it's all 120 frames a second, that just seems so archaic. And I think it
yeah,
reflects the breakneck speed by which those things are being developed, and the compromises that have to be made. And partly the experience that actually we're gonna upgrade the software at some point. I mean, you'll still
yeah,
hit the limitations of the hardware, but the idea that you can sort of upgrade things. I mean, that's another. So
yeah.
should we upgrade our little thinking here, and spend the next sort of 5 minutes talking about another sort of area? Let's just try a few more times. Okay. Any of these catch your eye?
I mean, always, I could talk about all of them.
They're interesting enough though. Driver profiles meets driver health monitoring. I think this isn't really in our wheelhouse, is it? But
No, but
what do you
I
think
feel
about
like
that?
definitely. I mean, I've I could probably talk about it now without mentioning the brand. But I've worked on an interesting kind of breathing rhythm concept for the in-car space, and understanding that breathing rhythm is some fairly unique amongst all of us.
Right.
Of course, if you look at Fitbit, you can match someone else. You can find someone else who has, according to the UI, a similar
Sure.
breathing pattern, but it's actually quite more nuanced than that. And I can that's interesting for a number of reasons. One is certain driver safety features, but also what I thought was more interesting was creating a luxury experience for this luxury car brand, and some of the interesting things you can do once you are able to synchronize certain things with someone's breathing pattern, and what that actually does for your mental state, and how that in turn can affect your breathing rate, and then how that
Wow.
has, you know, a cyclical effect with the car. It has this immersive feeling in which the car genuinely starts to feel like an extension of your body, because it's matching your breathing rate.
Right.
And there's
Okay.
something actually quite like neurologically powerful
So
about
it's the
that.
idea that the car is mirroring you in some kind of way, and that creates the connection.
Yeah, exactly. I just watched Alien Romulus for the
Right.
second time and
This is where it
this
gets
is probably
spoiled
how
for
well
me. I am a huge sort of Aliens fan, and I haven't watched it yet. So,
I've got an Alien t-shirt on right
oh my
now.
god, you've got a Sigourney t-shirt. Nice.
Well, you know about face huggers. So
Yes,
face
of
huggers,
course.
yeah. The great thing that face huggers do is they'll attach themselves to your face, but what they do is they match your breathing rhythm, so they provide you the same amount of oxygen as if you didn't have anything across your mouth.
Right.
So I can see, I can kind of see an analogy here with a car, where the car is kind of containing you, but it's matching your breathing rhythm, and it can afford many sort of applications, whether they sort of utilitarian, or they're more kind of brand building, or they're more kind of emotional. That are really interesting. And I think outside of the health or fitness monitoring space hasn't really been explored to its full extent.
I guess so. I mean, I like the idea that there is that level of customization that's possible anyway, and it's currently
Yeah,
underexploited. And I think these spaces, we have to tread quite carefully in some of these spaces, because we're allowing a form of, I mean, surveillance is when it's from above, and then I think it's surveillance, and there's the
mm,
the sort of quant movement where people are actively giving their own sort of
yeah,
self-quanting, giving their own sort of bio data over, to the extent that they'll use 23andMe, and there's all sorts of contention around that, who's going to own your
yeah,
data afterwards and all of that kind of stuff. But truly, when it comes to experience alone, by the way, I love how the cough was stifled by the I couldn't hear you cough. I know
oh,
we're both a bit poorly, but I couldn't hear you cough
yeah.
at all.
But now everyone knows because you just pointed it
I
out.
know, sorry, he's contagious, everyone. It's all the talk about health. But the
But
idea that, again, like, let's think about this really carefully, right? We went through COVID where, you know, people were snitching on each other. I was just
yeah,
thinking about how mad this was. In the UK, you could call the police up and say that these
yeah,
guys, these neighbors that I hate, not that I ever hate my neighbors, I love my neighbors, these guys have been going out and they're having parties and whatnot. And I just find that bonkers. That what if your car
yeah.
snitched on you? What if your car?
Uh,
And I think this is, we tend to be, and we're gonna try and wrap this up, but we tend to be very utopian in our attitude of, well, no one's going to use
Absolutely.
this for bad reasons. No one's going to have any ill intent. But then there's the other side as well, where some capitalist sort of, who absolutely sees the opportunity in capitalizing on that particular thing, is going to use it to a detrimental effect as well, of the people who are
Mm.
actually, and try and sort of, I mean, it's a negative
What
tone to end on, but I suppose it's quite it's a bit
I
of
mean,
thinking around this.
it might be something that we want to take over to the next podcast. In that, let's try and make sure that there are, of course, we're naturally inclined to think of like these utopian great ideas, but of course, maybe there are some. Of course, there will be some bad players that we should bear in mind.
Maybe we
We
should
could
have
take the
like
WhatsApp.
anti cards as well. Should we do that, so that you've got this, and then there's an evil edition, so we do half and half.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Anti
Yeah, let's do that.
patterns.
See, we're evolving already.
And I hope other people sort of evolve with us and sort of tell us what they think about this, and maybe take the concept a little bit further. So just
Mm.
want to say thank you to everyone who's listening in. Do I even have a little thank you? No, I don't have a thank you, but thank you very much. We'll add a
Yes.
thank you slide to the next show. But Tim, thanks so much. It's been really great to chat to you,
Yep.
and yeah, we'll do it again soon. All right.
Great. Yeah.
Cheers.
Thank you, everyone.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.